Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a seemingly simple feature update that's honestly about to completely rewire the entire global financial industry. We're talking about the exact moment your bank account officially moves into the chat interface. We're going to break down how a conversational AI tool is shifting from just answering your everyday questions to fundamentally restructuring who holds the keys to your money.
Okay, let's dive into this. 200 million. That is an absolutely massive number. And it represents how many people were already asking ChatGPT personal finance questions every single month. And here's the real kicker. They were doing this before any bank accounts were even connected to the platform. People were just organically flocking to the chat layer to ask about budgeting, getting out of debt, and financial planning.
So what does this all mean? Well, that brings us to the core stakes of today's explainer. What happens when you bridge that massive conversational demand with actual live financial data? Think about it. If 200 million people are already asking for financial guidance in the dark, what happens when you flip the switch, turn the lights on, and give the AI direct access to their actual transactions, balances, and liabilities? Well, on May 15, 2026, OpenAI gave us the answer. They launched a feature for US Pro subscribers that allows them to connect their financial accounts directly to ChatGPT through Plaid. And we're talking support for over 12,000 financial institutions here. Now, right now, it renders a read-only dashboard showing your spending and portfolio data, and it's powered by their highly advanced GPT 5.5 thinking model. Why is that important? Because this model wasn't just tested in a vacuum, it was evaluated by over 50 actual finance professionals. It also comes with a very explicit disclaimer: it's not a replacement for professional advice. But hey, while it might just look like a standard, everyday finance tracker, the mechanics running underneath the hood are something entirely different.
Section 1. Dashboards versus conversations. The interaction inversion.
For the last 20 years or so, dashboard-first apps basically required you to be highly data literate. You had to connect your accounts, stare at these really complex visual charts, and painstakingly categorize every single $5 coffee purchase. Honestly, it was a chore. But this new paradigm? It's entirely conversation first. You still connect your accounts, but then you just ask questions in plain English. Like, can I afford a house in 5 years? That's it. The AI does all the heavy lifting. It reasons through the data and proactively surfaces patterns for you. It drastically lowers the barrier to entry for financial planning.
And this brings us to a really vital insight from our source material. Quote, ChatGPT is not adding personal finance to ChatGPT. It is wrapping personal finance around the conversational query flow that already exists. Traditional personal finance apps had to spend years and literally billions of dollars in marketing just trying to convince people to care about budgeting. OpenAI, they don't have to do that at all. The intent and the users are already there. They don't have to convince you to download and open a new budgeting app because, well, you're already in the chat.
And this brilliantly illustrates the brutal scale advantage we're talking about here. Look at Mint. It was arguably the most famous budgeting app in history, right? At its absolute peak, it reached around 25 million users. Now compare that to ChatGPT's monthly finance queries, sitting at 200 million. That is an order of magnitude difference in organic distribution. It completely changes the basic economics of user acquisition in the entire financial technology space.
Section 2. The Agentic Trojan Horse. From Trust to Action. You see, that read-only dashboard we just talked about, it's not actually the final product. Not even close. It is simply a trust on-ramp. If you think about it psychologically, you're never going to let an AI spend your money, apply for a loan, or file your taxes until it proves it can accurately read and understand your money first, right? This preview period is all about building that essential, foundational trust. But once that trust is established, the training wheels come off. The launch announcement didn't stop at just reading your data. They explicitly pointed to forthcoming integrations with Intuit. This means the AI will soon actively submit credit card applications and, eventually, even file your taxes for you directly from the chat interface.
So the crucial point is understanding this exact concept, the agentic threshold. This is the boundary where an AI shifts from being a passive analyst that just reads your data into an active agent that takes direct, authorized transactional actions with your money. And let me tell you, crossing this threshold is what truly disrupts the entire financial ecosystem.
Section 3. The intermediation map. Who survives the blast radius?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in outcomes. Traditional personal finance apps face a direct extinction risk here because they simply cannot compete with a fluid conversational interface.
Robo-advisors? They're facing existential threats as financial advice itself becomes commoditized. Traditional banks basically get pushed into the background as utility rails. But look at the bottom of the list. Companies like Plaid and Intuit get massively elevated, becoming the critical infrastructure and transactional partners powering this entire new ecosystem. Intuit, in particular, really holds the keys to this future. They already own TurboTax, which has 40 million users, and Credit Karma, with 135 million members. But most importantly, Intuit provides the exact regulatory and execution infrastructure that OpenAI doesn't currently have. By partnering with Intuit, OpenAI avoids having to become a highly regulated financial institution itself. Intuit just seamlessly acts as the transactional layer operating underneath the AI's conversational interface.
Section 4. The friction, regulators, and global markets.
Remember that explicit disclaimer from the launch? The one saying it's not a replacement for professional financial advice? Well, that specific legal framing absolutely protects OpenAI from liability right now, while the tool is just providing read-only analysis. But once the AI crosses that agentic threshold we talked about and actually starts applying for credit cards or filing your taxes, that simple little disclaimer is inevitably going to face some intense scrutiny from heavy-hitting consumer protection and financial agencies, like the SEC and the CFPB.
And honestly, that regulatory scrutiny is completely warranted when you take a close look at the AI's accuracy scores. On internal benchmarks designed with actual finance professionals, GPT 5.5 scores somewhere between 79 and 82.5 out of 100. And on the third-party finance agent benchmark, it hits about 60%. Now, don't get me wrong, these are seriously impressive scores for a language model. But a model that is confidently wrong even a tiny fraction of the time is extremely dangerous when it's authorized to move your real money around.
Beyond just AI accuracy, there's also a massive geographic hurdle. The US rollout relies heavily on a private sector data aggregator like Plaid, but the European model, it is an entirely different beast. It relies on strictly regulated APIs governed by mandates like PSD3 and FIDA, which strictly require licensed third-party providers. So OpenAI cannot simply port their US integration over to Europe. They are going to have to completely re-architect the product to comply with a highly fragmented country-by-country regulatory framework.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5. The 24-month forecast, re-architecting finance. Tracing this expected timeline shows us an incredibly rapid restructuring of the industry. By Q4 of 2026, we expect to see credit card applications natively submitted directly from the chat. By mid-2027, traditional personal finance management apps as a standalone category could be largely extinct. And by Q1 2028, just in time for tax season, we expect to see full tax filing handled completely autonomously from the chat interface. We are talking about moving from a simple read-only trust on-ramp to a totally new financial ecosystem in literally just 2 years. To bring this all together, our source material summarizes it perfectly. Quote, "It is intermediation, not feature. It is distribution, not capability. It is the on-ramp to agentic consumer finance, not the destination." Basically, this was never just a neat little dashboard to help you balance your budget. It's a highly calculated land grab for distribution, positioning the chat layer as the absolute center of the consumer financial universe.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply important question to consider as this technology continues to scale. When your AI agent controls the conversation, who will ultimately control the relationship with your money? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.